First and foremost, Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoyed your time with your family and friends and did not allow the Warriors game to ruin your mood too much, because this is a beautiful day. And I hope the day was absolutely blessing. For me personally, not only was it a beautiful day with family, I just found out that my wife is pregnant. So 42 years old, about to turn 43, about to have my first child. I can't be too bothered by anything that's going on. But, of course, as usual, I will break down what exactly went down in tonight's game. But you all should know at this point, by now, what is wrong with the Warriors. What are the things that are going wrong that is causing this team to lose game after game after game, lose clutch game after clutch game after clutch game. Same story, different day. That's all it really is. Steve Kerr going to 3-guard lineups, senseless 3-guard lineups, and taking Slo-Mo out of the equation. Slo-Mo being their only viable power forward coming off their bench, and Steve Kerr took that guy out of rotation. I want you to think about this for a second. They had Dario Saric, who is also really a power forward, but Steve Kerr stuck him at the center spot last season and compromising the entirety of the Warriors defense for half of games whenever Dario Saric was on the floor. And Dario Saric was a vet's minimum player, by the way, last season, and Steve Kerr did not take that guy out of the rotation until 60 plus games. And yet Slo-Mo, a guy that the Warriors signed for the next 3 years to play a viable role for the Warriors as a backup power forward, is suddenly nowhere to be found. And so the Warriors persistently play every single game without an actual power forward whenever Draymond takes a seat, and either Andrew Wiggins or Jonathan Kuminga is persistently at the power forward spot where they are weak. Andrew Wiggins, his power lies as a POA perimeter defender, and well, you put him at the power forward spot suddenly where he's just not good enough in. You also take him away from what he does best, which is the POA. Instead, you force Wiggins and Jonathan Kuminga to persistently play next to 3 tiny guards. There's literally not a small forward on the floor. There are 3 guards, and you have Buddy Hield, Potts, Steph Curry, Buddy Hield, Potts, Dennis Schroeder, one or the other. These were the combinations that Steve Kerr was playing, and every time he played those combinations, the Warriors could not score and they could not defend. Think about it. You have Dennis Schroeder, you have Potts, and you have Buddy Hield guarding the perimeter. How are these guys supposed to recover on 3-point shooters? Who is that capable POA that is stopping the other team's best perimeter player? When the lineup is Dennis Schroeder, Potts, Buddy Hield, Jonathan Kuminga, and Kevon Looney, who exactly is Dennis Schroeder supposed to play the pick and roll with? I thought Steve Kerr promised that he's going to allow Dennis Schroeder to be the best version of himself and do what he does best and allow a bunch of pick and rolls. Where has that been? Well, how can Dennis Schroeder play any pick and roll when there's literally nobody to play the pick and roll with? His big is literally Kevon Looney, and they never run any pick and rolls between Dennis Schroeder and Jonathan Kuminga. And if you're playing Dennis Schroeder and Buddy Hield at the same time, or Steph Curry and Buddy Hield at the same time, why is Pods on the floor at the same time next to those guys instead of Slo-Mo, which would allow JK or Wiggins to play the small forward position and put Slo-Mo at the power forward spot? That's what they did in the first 11 games when they went 9-2. So why has Steve Kerr suddenly gone away from that to ensure that Pods is in every single unit imaginable to mankind, to ensure that he's always on the floor no matter what? No matter how small the Warriors are, no matter how incapable they are on the offensive end of the floor, no matter how incapable they are on the defensive end of the floor, Steve Kerr keeps running out the same lineups over and over and over again. In the first quarter, the Warriors actually got off to a great start, running a bigger lineup with Andrew Wiggins, Draymond, and Trace, and that was with AD on the floor at the same time. And the Warriors got out to a very solid lead, 16-9, I believe it was. Next thing you know, you have that Dennis Schroeder, Pods, and Buddy Hield lineup next to JK and Looney, and the Warriors proceed to go scoreless in the final 2.5 minutes of the first quarter. And even in the second quarter, when Steph Curry gets back into the game, he's being put next to, once again, Pods and GP2, and once again you are running a tiny lineup, and this time it's JK and Draymond rather than JK and Looney. So it's a 6'2" guy, 6'2" guy, 6'4" guy, a 6'7" guy, and a 6'6" guy. And Steve Kerr persistently continues to put out literally the smallest lineups in NBA history. And so it didn't matter that the Lakers lost AD early in the game due to an ankle sprain. The Warriors can't capably stop anybody, can't get out to any of the three-point shooters, can't stop guys enough at the rim. There is no rim protection. And once again, Steph Curry does everything in his power to bail out Steve Kerr. You know, for once in my life, I would like to see the Warriors be able to win a game because of their coach, instead of Steph Curry and the Warriors constantly having to try to bail out Steve Kerr for all the terrible decisions he made throughout the course of the game. And sadly enough, we can't even properly appreciate historic performances by Steph because there's nothing to celebrate when it comes in an L. The Warriors are down 10 with about 3.5 minutes left to go in this game. Steph Curry proceeds to score 13 points in that span to, like I said, try to bail out Steve Kerr from yet another disastrous loss. And somehow, some way or another, the guy ties the game with yet another impossible three-point shot from the corner with a hand in his face, with 12 seconds left to go in the game. Unfortunately, the small lineup ultimately pays the price as Andrew Wiggins ends up allowing a drive to Austin Reeves right at the basket. There is zero rim protection because instead of Trayce Jackson-Davis being there to have some rim protection, you got Jonathan Kuminga in there. Is that Jonathan Kuminga's fault? No, it is not. It is the decision of the coach that is ultimately costing the Warriors everything. So in a game where Anthony Davis only ended up playing 7 minutes of the game, and he was a -7 when he did play, the Warriors end up losing yet another game that they should have won. Dennis Schroeder is once again awful and completely inefficient, shooting 3 of 10 from the field for 11 points. And I can't blame him because Steve Kerr is putting him in lineups where it is impossible for Dennis Schroeder to thrive. If you want Dennis Schroeder to thrive, you should put defenders around him and a couple of bigs to ensure that he can run effective pick and rolls and run an offense that makes sense for him. You can't do that when you have Pods and Buddy Hield next to him, a non-power forward in Jonathan Kuminga, and Kevon Looney, who's not fit to be a pick and roll partner. Potts, who scored 6 points on 5 shots, 2 of 5 shooting, and basically was a non-factor in every facet of the game. He wasn't rebounding, he wasn't assisting, he wasn't stopping anybody, and he wasn't scoring. And yet he's persistently out there with 2 other guards on the floor for no good reason. And I'm not blaming this on Potts. We can't hate on Potts for the fact that Steve Kerr is electing to put him out there next to these 2 other guards, a non-viable power forward on top of that, and expect the Warriors to do anything. They are not good on either end of the floor, and it makes no sense for them to continue to go with these small lineups because offensively it is not working. Like I said in the previous video, the only reason you run a 3-guard lineup is because that lineup is so effective from an offensive standpoint that it's actually worth doing, even if you give some things up from a defensive standpoint. From my personal philosophy, if you're giving something up defensively, it's generally not worth it. No championship caliber team sacrifices their defense for their offense. No serious championship caliber coach persistently and consistently sacrifice his defense to be better on offense. And the problem once again is that it's not even working on offense. All of their offensive lulls come when they run these 3-guard lineups. There's no viable screening on the floor, and these 3 little guards can't do anything other than chuck up a bunch of bad shots from the perimeter because they can't get into the paint because there is no screening and there's no balance on the floor whatsoever. And you know, down the stretch, Jonathan Kuminga did provide the Warriors some offense, but ultimately he was like -20 or worse throughout the course of the game. Ultimately, he ended up being -17. Do I blame Jonathan Kuminga for that? Not really, because like I said, it's not his choice to play the power forward position, nor is it his choice to have 3 tiny guards next to him while he is a weak power forward to begin with. So how is that his fault? You put just about any even viable power forward in that situation, you're making that player vulnerable. When you're putting Dennis Schroeder, Potts, and Buddy Hield next to them and expect them to do anything on defense. So none of this is on the players. All of this is on the decision making of a single individual, and his name is Steve Kerr. As long as Steve Kerr gets unchecked by the media, by the players, by the ownership, by the front office, and continues to run these things over and over and over again this season, And last season, when he did it with Chris Paul, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, all these nonsensical lineups, putting Dario Saric at the 5 for 60 plus games and never gets checked by anybody except for me. How about the season before that? You put Jordan Poole, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and that 3-guard combo was never viable. And once again, you put Andrew Wiggins at the 4 and you put Draymond at the 5, and you continue to roll out these ridiculous lineups with no POA, putting Andrew Wiggins out of position. Sometimes he puts Klay Thompson at power forward, one of the worst rebounding guards, shooting guards. Klay Thompson is literally one of the worst defensive rebounding shooting guards in the league, and you put that guy at power forward. And all of this, of course, also puts Draymond in a very compromising position, being forced to be an enforcer at the center spot, playing next to a bunch of midgets next to him. And there are some things that have been really frustrating about Draymond outside of his inability to be more effective on the offensive end of the floor. Some of these ridiculous and wild passes that he's been throwing as of late. He can't even throw a proper lob to Trace, who is wide open. There's another one where he got an offensive rebound late in the fourth quarter and he just throws it out of bounds right over the head of Dennis Schroeder. And I just don't understand. His coordination with these passes are just getting out of hand this season. And that's frustrating. But it's really, really minor. Ultimately, it's 2 turnovers. It's all on the decision making of Steve Kerr. As long as he continues to stay on this team, the Warriors will continue to flounder the way they have. They are now 3-11 in their last 14 games. And this is not going to stop. So the first viable solution for the Warriors to overcome this is to get Steve Kerr out of here. The other thing that they have to do is they need to make some trades, man. Dennis Schroeder should not be starting and closing next to Steph Curry. They're just too small. They need to package Jonathan Kuminga, who is not a fit with this team. They need to package Potts, who is not ready to be a championship. They need to package Brandon Podziemski, who's just not good enough to be a rotational piece for a team trying to contend for a title in his second year. The guy is very limited from a playmaking standpoint. He's very limited from an offensive standpoint. It just doesn't make any sense. Maybe without Steve Kerr, Moses Moody would be more useful. But at the end of the day, I'm just over the movement of the kids. And in that regard, the blame goes to nobody but Joe Lacob, who thinks that he needs to worry about some timeline after Steph Curry, despite the fact that Steph Curry is still doing what he's doing and has turned a pathetic Warriors franchise into the most valuable NBA team in the world, literally. And this is the thanks he gets from Joe Lacob. Joe Lacob doesn't care enough to forget the kids and turn them into other assets so that they can bring in actual viable vets that are ready to contend next to Steph Curry and play on behalf of and for Steph Curry, who is the best player on this team. And Joe Lacob, by the way, is also the same guy who ended up signing Steve Kerr to the largest 2-year contract the NBA has ever seen, while Steve Kerr had the Warriors toiling in the 10th seed. So all of this truly starts at the top. Joe Lacob. When Steph Curry is done, the Warriors are going to be absolutely awful. And I hope if you're a Warriors fan, and I hope if you live in San Francisco, you do not give your money to Joe Lacob's floundering franchise when Steph Curry is gone, man. The guy does not deserve your money. He is greedy beyond belief, and he wants credit over Steph Curry, literally. He thinks he's the architect of all of this. His ego is completely out of control. He thinks he's some basketball mind, and he clearly isn't. The guy literally thought that James Wiseman was his future and held him for 3 years too long. And he's been doing the same thing with Jonathan Kuminga, and now he's doing it with Potts. And I feel like maybe he's forcing Steve Kerr's hands a little bit with Potts. I don't know. That's the only other reason I can think of why Steve Kerr would continue to put out Potts with every single possible unit you can throw out there. Whether it's a closing lineup, whether it's an in-between lineup, whether it's an all-bench lineup, it doesn't matter. Potts is in every single lineup. Nobody else on this roster gets this kind of rope. Trace makes one mistake, he goes straight to the bench. Potts, no matter what he does or doesn't do, remains on the floor. And again, this is not Potts' fault. This is not Jonathan Kuminga's fault. This is not Moody's fault. This is not any other player's fault. This is on Joe Lacob and Steve Kerr, two of the greatest charlatans I've ever seen in my life, man. Bob Myers would be included in that deal, but he's been taken over by Mike Dunleavy, who actually is a basketball mind, and he's done everything he could to make this team better. That's why he went and got Kyle Anderson, aka Slo-Mo, the only viable power forward coming off their bench once again, and Steve Kerr has completely iced that guy out of the equation, and it is costing the Warriors everything. Steph Curry deserves better than this. Look at what he did in this game. That clearly shows you how much he has left in the tank, but he needs more help than a bunch of kids who are not ready to contend at all, and he needs a better coach than a coach who believes that these tiny 3-guard lineups with no real POA in there are viable lineups. Nothing he does makes sense at all on either end of the floor, and you have to learn to know when to say goodbye. Steph Curry included. This, once again, like I said in the previous video, this is also on Steph Curry for continuing to allow this to happen, continuing to just go with the program of these small lineups. I mean, surely he has eyes too. Surely he must see that there is a pattern here where they are persistently going small, and there are persistent lulls on both ends of the floor, and they are persistently losing games. So sadly enough, I have to continue to put the blame, part of the blame anyway, on Steph Curry for not being louder and not being more vocal and not being more forceful in regards to what's going on. He needs to let go of the fact that he's friends with Steve Kerr and that he feels close to him as a human being or whatever the case may be, and realize that Steve Kerr is compromising his career and has been doing that for a very, very, very long time. I mean, think about the results 4 out of the last 5 years. Play-in, championship, second round exit, play-in. And this season, another bound to be a play-in situation at best if they continue to go this route, if not worse. That's all I got for you. All I can do is continue to speak the truth on this situation, and I am just floored by the complete and utter support that I have been getting from you guys in the comment section, those of you guys that follow me, those of you guys that are new to the channel, those of you guys that are finding my message. And the more of us continue to join and combine our forces and become an army that is collectively spreading the correct message, ultimately this is the best way to put up a real fight. Because like I said, Warriors media will never put up that fight. The players themselves are not making enough noise. It's now on the fans, a citizen journalism, to overcome all the BS and speak so much truth and be so loud about it, it becomes undeniable. So thank you for continuing to go on this journey with me. Ultimately, I can only go as far as your support. Again, Merry Christmas to you all. Until next time.